The debt notice arrived on a Tuesday morning and carried by a man Marcus Brennan had known since childhood. Tommy Fletcher didn't meet his eyes when he handed over the envelope, just muttered something about orders from the bank and rode off before the dust could settle. Marcus stood on his porch, the paper trembling in his calloused hands. He felt the last threads of hope snap clean. 45 days, that's what the letter said, printed in coal-black ink that didn't care about sweat or sacrifice or the 23 years he'd poured into this land. 45 days to produce $400 plus interest, or the ranch his father had died building would belong to someone else. Someone who'd never broken their back clearing stones from the fields, never watched a child take her first steps in that barn, never buried a wife under the cottonwood tree near the creek. Marcus crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. The August sun was already brutal, turning the air thick and heavy, making every breath feel like work. His corn was withering in the fields, the irrigation channels he'd dug running dry faster than he could fill them. The well was giving up just like everything else, just like him. He walked toward the north pasture, needing to check the fence line before the heat became unbearable. His boots kicked up pale dust, with each step the earth cracking beneath him in patterns that looked like shattered glass. The land was dying, had been dying for 2 seasons now, ever since the drought settled in and refused to leave. But Marcus kept working it anyway because stopping meant admitting defeat, and his father hadn't raised a quitter. That's what he told himself, at least. That's what he'd been telling himself every morning for the past year, even as the creditors circled closer and the future narrowed to a point so sharp it could draw blood. The woman appeared like a mirage at first, a dark shape against the rocks about 100 yards from his property line. Marcus stopped walking, squinting against the glare. His first instinct was to turn around, pretend he'd seen nothing. Whatever trouble was out there didn't need to become his trouble. He had enough of his own. But something about the way she was slumped made him move forward. The shape was wrong, too still, like a puppet with its strings cut. As he got closer, details emerged that turned his stomach cold. Blood dark and still spreading, soaking through leather clothing. One arm wrapped tight around her ribs, the other hanging useless. Her face was turned away, dark hair matted with more blood, and flies were already gathering. Marcus broke into a run. She was tall, taller than most men he'd known, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they'd seen hard work. Her clothing was different from anything he'd seen in town. Intricate beadwork along the seams, patterns that spoke of craftsmanship and purpose. The blood came from multiple wounds, the worst one a deep gash across her ribs that had sliced through leather and flesh both. He knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse was there, faint and irregular, but present. She was alive. Barely. His mind raced through calculations he didn't want to make. Getting involved with tribal matters was dangerous, the kind of dangerous that got people killed. The territories existed in careful balance, invisible boundaries maintained by violence and fear. White settlers on one side, native tribes on the other, in a buffer zone of contested land where both sides carried guns and asked questions never. This woman was clearly from the tribes. The clothing alone would be enough to mark her, but there was something else, something in the way she carried herself, even unconscious, a bearing that spoke of pride and purpose. Marcus looked back toward his ranch, barely visible through the heat shimmer, then at the woman, then at the empty horizon stretching in every direction. No one had seen him. He could walk away right now, leave her to whatever fate had found her, save himself the inevitable complications. He had his own problems. $400 worth of problems plus interest. He couldn't afford to take on someone else's trouble. His hands were already moving, sliding under her shoulders, testing her weight. She was heavy with muscle and bone, and getting her back to the ranch would take every ounce of strength he had left. The wounds were still bleeding, which meant time was critical. Every minute he delayed was a minute closer to her dying. Marcus lifted her with a grunt, feeling his back protest immediately. Her head lolled against his chest, and he could feel the warmth of her blood seeping through his shirt. He adjusted his grip and started walking, each step deliberate, conserving energy for the long haul ahead. The sun climbed higher as he walked. Sweat ran down his face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. His arms burned, his shoulders screamed, but he kept moving. The ranch house grew slowly larger, taking forever to get closer, and Marcus counted his steps to keep his mind occupied. 100, 200, 300. each number a small victory against the urge to set her down and rest. By the time he reached the barn, his shirt was soaked through with her blood and his sweat mixed together. He kicked the door open and carried her into the dim coolness, laying her on a bed of hay in the back corner. Only then did he let himself breathe, his lungs pulling air in ragged gasps. The wound in her side was worse than he'd thought. Deep enough to see bone edges ragged, like someone had meant to gut her and barely missed. Marcus had seen injuries before, had stitched up horses and cattle, had even sewn his own leg once after a fence accident. But this was different. This was someone trying to kill, not wound. He grabbed his medical kit, the battered tin box he kept for ranch emergencies, and started working. Clean the wound first, clear away the dirt and blood, see what he was dealing with. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, tearing strips from an old shirt, to make bandages, heating water over a small flame, to sterilize the needle. She woke while he was cleaning the worst of it, her entire body going rigid. Her eyes snapped open, dark and fierce, and her hand shot out to grip his wrist with strength that made his bones creak. For a moment, Marcus thought she might break his arm. Her fingers clamped down like a vice, her gaze wild and unfocused. His voice came out steady despite the pain radiating up his forearm. "You need to stay still. That wound keeps bleeding. You won't last another hour." She stared at him, breath coming in short gasps, clearly trying to decide if he was threat or ally. Her eyes darted around the barn, taking in the layout, the exits, calculating odds he couldn't see. Then her gaze dropped to the water basin beside him, to the clean cloth in his hand, to the bandages he'd prepared. Slowly, very slowly, her grip loosened. "Why?" Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper, each word costing her. Marcus didn't have an answer that made sense even to himself. "Because leaving you to didn't seem right." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for deception or hidden motive. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she leaned back against the hay, allowing him to continue. Her jaw was clenched tight enough that it cracked teeth, but she didn't make a sound as he pressed the cloth against the wound. Most men he knew would have been screaming. Hell, most men wouldn't have survived this long with injuries like these. "They'll come looking," she said it after a while, her eyes fixed on the barn ceiling. "Soon. Who, everyone?" She closed her eyes. "My people. The ones who did this. Maybe others." Marcus tied off the bandage, his mind racing through implications that kept getting worse. This wasn't just some random attack. This was betrayal, the kind that got entire communities torn apart. He could feel the weight of it settling on his shoulders, the choice he had already made without fully understanding the consequences. "What happened, Ambush?" "3 men, maybe 4. She touched the bandage, carefully testing it. "I was hunting alone, tracking elk beyond our usual territory. They were waiting. Someone from your own people." Her eyes opened again, sharp and alert despite the pain. "I didn't say that." But she didn't need to. The silence that followed told Marcus everything. This was internal conflict, tribal politics turned violent, and he just stepped into the middle of it by choosing to help her. He stood and moved to the barn door, peering through the gap. The sun was higher now, the heat shimmer making the air dance. In the distance beyond his withering fields, he could see dust rising against the horizon. Riders still far enough away that he couldn't count them, but close enough to be inevitable. "They're coming." Behind him, he heard her trying to stand, heard the sharp intake of breath as the movement pulled at her wound. When he turned, she was on her feet, one hand pressed against the barn wall for support, the other reaching for something that wasn't there, looking for a weapon she'd lost. "You can't fight. You can barely stand." "Then I'll die standing." There was no bravado in her voice, just simple facts stated plainly. "But I won't let them find me hiding in your barn. That would make you a target too." Marcus looked at her, this tall, wounded woman who'd rather face down her killers than put him at risk, and felt something shift in his chest. He'd spent months watching his land die, watching his future crumble, feeling helpless against forces he couldn't control. Debt and drought and the slow death of everything his father had built. But this was different. This was a choice he could make, a line he could draw. He walked to the corner of the barn and pulled back a tarp, revealing the rifle he kept for predators. Not much, but it was loaded, and he knew how to use it. "You're going to stay hidden, and I'm going to deal with whoever comes riding up to my property uninvited. You don't understand what you're risking." "Maybe not." He checked the chamber, made sure the action was smooth. "But it's my risk to take." The dust cloud was closer now, minutes away maybe. Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest, fear and adrenaline mixing into something that felt almost like clarity. He'd never shot at a person before, never even pointed a gun at another human being. But he'd killed plenty of animals and knew how to line up a shot, how to control his breathing, how to squeeze the trigger smooth. How different could it be? The woman watched him and something like respect crossed her face. "What's your name, Marcus Brennan?" "I'm Kiona." She said it simply like a gift or a promise. "If I survive this, I won't forget what you're doing. Just focus on surviving." Three riders emerged from the dust cloud, their horses dark with sweat and foam. They wore a mix of tribal clothing and items clearly taken from settlers, a combination that made Marcus's stomach tighten. These weren't hunters or scouts. These were men who existed in the spaces between two worlds belonging to neither, which made them more dangerous than either. Marcus stepped out of the barn before they could dismount the rifle held casually but visibly across his chest. Not pointing at anyone, but impossible to ignore. His mouth was dry, his hands wanted to shake, but he kept them steady through force of will. The lead rider, a man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, pulled his horse to a stop about 15 feet away. He had the look of someone who'd seen violence and dealt it in equal measure, eyes cold and calculating, assessing Marcus like a butcher evaluating meat. "Morning." Marcus kept his voice level, though his heart was hammering so loud he wondered if they could hear it. The scarred man didn't return the greeting. His eyes moved past Marcus to the barn, then to the house, then back to Marcus's face. "We're tracking someone." A woman, tall, dark hair, wounded. "You seen anyone like that? Just me in the dirt out here?" Marcus shifted his weight slightly, making sure the rifle remained visible. "What's she done? That's not your concern." The man's hand rested on the knife at his belt, casual but deliberate. "You mind if we look around?" "I do, actually. This is private property." The second rider, younger and twitchy, laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "Private property. You hear that? Man thinks lines on paper mean something out here." Marcus kept his attention on the leader, ignoring the younger one's attempt to bait him. "They mean something to me, and they should mean something to anyone with respect for another man's land." The scarred man studied him clearly, trying to decide if Marcus was brave or stupid, probably concluding it was the latter. "You're in a bad spot to be making stands, friend." He gestured at the withering crops behind Marcus. "That's a lot of dead corn. Place looks like it's one bad season from being dust." "That's my business. And the woman we're tracking is ours." The man leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping lower. "Last chance. You seen her or not?" Every instinct Marcus had screamed at him to just say no and let them move on. But something in the way they carried themselves, the way they'd phrased the question, told him they already suspected. They were testing him, waiting to see if he'd lie, looking for an excuse to tear his place apart. "I told you, there's no one here but me." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. Then he made a gesture, and the other two riders began to spread out, flanking toward the barn from both sides. Marcus raised the rifle, not quite pointing it, but making his intention clear. "That's far enough. You really want to die for someone you don't even know? I want you off my land." For a moment, nobody moved. The sun beat down on them, heat radiating off the hard-packed earth in visible waves. Marcus could feel sweat running down his back under his shirt, could feel the rifle getting slick in his hands. 3 against 1, and they all carried weapons. If this turned into a fight, his chances weren't good. But backing down now meant they'd tear his barn apart, find Kiona, and probably kill them both anyway. The standoff stretched thin as wire, ready to snap. Marcus could see the calculation happening in the scarred man's eyes, weighing the cost of violence against the benefit. 3 men could overwhelm one, but someone would get hurt in the process, maybe killed. Was one wounded woman worth that risk? Then Kiona's voice cut through the tension, strong and clear, despite the pain it must have cost her. "You're looking for me." Marcus's heart stopped. She was standing in the barn doorway, one hand pressed against the frame for support, the other hanging at her side. Even wounded and swaying, there was something commanding about her presence, something that made her seem larger than her actual size. The 3 riders turned their horses, and Marcus saw recognition flash across their faces, followed quickly by something else. Fear. Kiona. The scarred man said her name like it carried weight, like speaking it out loud changed the nature of everything. "You should have stayed down, and you should have finished what you started." She took a step forward, blood seeping through the bandage at her side, but her voice remained steady. But you always were weak, Chayton, even when we were children. The man called Chayton's face hardened, the scar on his temple twitching. You don't know what you've cost us. I know exactly what I cost you. Your chance to betray everything our people stand for. Marcus glanced between them, understanding dawning cold and sharp. This wasn't about a random attack. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for a long time. And he just stepped into the middle of it by choosing to save her life. Chayton's hand moved to his knife, wrapping around the handle. The farmer protected you. That makes him part of this now. Kiona's eyes met Marcus's for a brief moment, and he saw something there he hadn't seen before. Regret. She'd tried to warn him, tried to leave, and he'd refused to listen. Now they'd both pay the price. Tell them, Chayton. Kiona's voice was sharp as broken glass. Tell them what you promised the settlement men. Tell them how you plan to sell our hunting grounds for golden whiskey. Chayton's face went dark, his jaw clenching. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you met with them 3 times. I know you drew maps showing where our camps move with the seasons. I know you told them when our warriors would be north chasing buffalo. She took another step forward, and Marcus could see the effort it cost her, see the way her legs trembled. And I know my father would have you stripped of your name for what you've done. The younger rider looked at Chayton, confusion clear on his face. Is that true? She's lying to save herself. Chayton said it quickly, but his voice had lost its certainty. My father is Neshoba. Kiona spoke the name clearly, letting it land and settle. Chief of our people for 20 winters. And when he finds out what you've done, Chayton, there won't be enough distance in this territory for you to run. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Chief's daughter. He'd saved the chief's daughter. The implications crashed over him like a wave, drowning him in consequences he couldn't begin to calculate. If these men killed her, it would mean war. If they killed him too, nobody would ever know what really happened. But if she survived, Chayton seemed to be doing the same calculation, and Marcus could see the moment he made his decision. The knife came out smoothly, and the other 2 riders drew their weapons in response. 3 armed men against a wounded woman and a farmer with 1 rifle. Your father isn't here. Chayton kicked his horse forward. And dead women don't tell stories. Everything happened at once. Marcus raised the rifle and fired. The shot went wide. He'd been aiming for center mass, but the horse's sudden movement threw off his aim. The bullet caught the animal's shoulder instead, and it screamed and reared, throwing Chayton from the saddle. The other 2 riders charged, and Marcus knew he didn't have time to reload. His hands fumbled with the lever action, trying to chamber another round, but they were coming too fast. Kiona moved faster than someone with her injury should have been able to. She grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the barn wall and swung it in a wide arc that caught the second rider across the chest, knocking him sideways off his horse. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs in a sound like a punctured bellows. The third rider made it to Marcus' knife, already swinging down in a silver arc. Marcus dropped the rifle and caught the man's wrist with both hands, feeling the blade stop inches from his throat. They struggled, locked together, the rider's horse dancing nervously beneath them. Marcus could smell leather and sweat and the copper tang of blood. Whether his or someone else's, he didn't know. Then the rider jerked and went limp, sliding from his saddle. Behind him, Kiona stood with the pitchfork, its tines red and dripping. Her face was pale sheet white, and the bandage at her side was completely soaked through with fresh blood. She'd torn something vital, Marcus could tell just by looking at her. Chayton was on his feet, limping, but alive, his injured horse running off toward the horizon. He looked at his 2 companions, one groaning on the ground, holding his ribs, the other not moving at all, then at Kiona and Marcus standing together. Whatever he saw in that moment made him choose survival over vengeance. He ran limping hard, but moving fast, disappearing into the brush and rocks. Marcus watched him go, knowing they'd just made an enemy who wouldn't stop, who'd come back with more men and more weapons and more hate. But before he could process that thought, Kiona's knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground, and this time when he felt the warmth of her blood against his hands, he knew she'd torn something vital. Her eyes were unfocused, pupils dilating. Your father, Marcus's voice was urgent, almost desperate. How do I find him? You don't, she whispered it barely audible. He finds you. Then she was unconscious again, and Marcus was alone with 2 bodies in his yard, a wounded woman in his arms, and the certainty that everything was about to get much worse before it got better. The night was the longest of Marcus Brennan's life. He dragged the dead rider into the barn, covering the body with a tarp he couldn't bear to look at. The man's eyes had stayed open, staring at nothing, and Marcus kept seeing them every time he blinked. The weight of what he'd done sat on his chest like a stone. The wounded one had regained consciousness an hour after the fight, immediately starting to scream threats through broken ribs. Marcus had gagged him with a strip of cloth and bound his hands with rope normally used for cattle, then dragged him into the barn too. Keeping them both there felt wrong, surrounded by hay and tools and the smell of horses, but he didn't know what else to do. Couldn't exactly bring them into the house. Kiona he'd carried inside, laying her on his own bed while he tore up every spare sheet he owned to make fresh bandages. The wound had reopened during the fight worse than before, and blood kept seeping through no matter how tight he wrapped it. He'd seen enough injuries on the ranch to know this was bad. Life-threatening bad. Without proper medical care, she'd be dead by morning. But there was no doctor within 50 miles, and even if there had been, bringing one here would mean explanations Marcus couldn't give, questions he couldn't answer. So he did what he could with what he had, changing bandages every hour, forcing water between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow, and praying to a God he hadn't spoken to since his wife died. Around midnight, fever set in. Kiona's skin burned hot enough to feel through his palm, and she started speaking in a language he didn't understand. Sometimes it sounded like prayers, sometimes like arguments. Her fever was still high, her skin is still burning, but her breathing seemed slightly less labored. Maybe she'd make it. Maybe. The wounded man in the barn had worked his gag loose during the night and started yelling the moment Marcus opened the door. His voice was hoarse words coming out in a mix of English and another language, but the meaning was clear enough. Threats, promises of violence, detailed descriptions of what would happen when his friends came back. Marcus walked over and checked the ropes. Still tight. The man's ribs were clearly broken, purple bruising spreading across his chest, but he'd live, unfortunately. Your friends aren't coming back. Marcus kept his voice flat, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. Chayton ran. The other one's dead. It's just you. The man spat, the gesture more symbolic than effective given his position on the ground. You think killing Talon changes anything? You think Chayton won't come back with 20 men, Sifty? He laughed, a wet, painful sound. You're dead already, you just don't know it yet. Maybe, Marcus stood looking down at him, but so are you if your friends don't come fast enough. Those ribs could puncture a lung. You could be bleeding inside right now and not even know it. The man's laughter died, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. What do you want, the truth? What's this really about? Why try to kill her? She's poison. Turning the chief against his own people, filling his head with weak ideas about peace and coexistence. The words came out bitter, full of genuine hatred. We had a chance to take real power, to forge alliances that would have made us strong. But she found out and ran straight to Neshoba like the obedient daughter she is. So Chayton decided to eliminate the problem. We decided together. Me, Chayton Talon. He nodded toward where his dead companion lay under the tarp. And others, more than you know. This isn't over. Marcus absorbed that information, feeling the weight of it settle. This wasn't just three men acting alone. This was a faction organized and committed, which meant even with Chayton gone, the danger remained. How many others? The man smiled through bloody teeth. Enough. Marcus left him there and walked back to the house, his mind churning through options that all led nowhere good. He could try to ride to the nearest settlement, get help from the territorial marshal. But that was 3 days away, and leaving Kiona alone that long would kill her. He could stay and hope her father found them first. But what if Chayton came back with reinforcements before that happened? There were no good choices, just degrees of bad. He made coffee strong and black and drank it standing at the window. The sun was fully up now, burning away the last coolness of morning. His fields stretched out before him, rows of dying corn, creating patterns like grave markers. Everything he'd worked for, everything his father had died building, reduced to dust and debt. And now this, violence and blood and consequences that reached far beyond his property line. A sound from the bedroom made him set down the coffee and grab the rifle. But it was just Kiona, stirring, her eyes fluttering open. They were clearer than they'd been all night, focused and aware. Marcus set the rifle aside and moved to the bed. How do you feel? Like I've been stabbed and shot and beaten? Her voice was rough, throat dry from fever. But alive, thanks to you. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. He helped her sit up enough to drink water supporting her weight. Your friend Chayton got away. And the one who survived says there are others more than just the three who attacked you. Kiona's jaw tightened, but she didn't look surprised. There would be. Chayton was always good at gathering followers. Men who felt overlooked, who wanted power they hadn't earned, who believed strength meant violence. What was he planning? The prisoner said something about forging alliances. With the settlement men. The ones who want our land, our hunting grounds, our water rights. She closed her eyes, exhaustion clear on her face. Chayton was going to give it to them. All of it, in exchange for gold and weapons and a position of authority in whatever new order they built. That's why you were hunting alone. You were investigating, gathering proof, trying to understand how deep the betrayal went. She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. I planned to bring evidence to my father, let him decide how to handle it. But Chayton must have known I was close to the truth. The ambush wasn't random. They were waiting for me. Marcus thought about that, about the level of planning and patience it would take. This wasn't impulsive violence. This was calculated. Your father. The prisoner called him Neshoba. What kind of man is he? The kind who doesn't forgive betrayal. Kiona's voice was soft but certain. The kind who would ride through fire to protect his people. And when he finds out what happened to me, what you did to save me, he'll come. She paused. You should be ready for that. Ready how? She almost smiled. Don't point any guns at him would be a good start. The warriors arrived 2 hours later. Marcus saw them cresting the hill while he was outside checking the irrigation pump, a futile task given the well was nearly dry. But old habits died hard, and keeping busy helped him avoid thinking about the bodies in his barn and the woman in his bed and the life he'd just irrevocably changed. There were at least 20 of them moving in a formation that spoke of discipline and purpose. All armed, all mounted on horses that looked fresh and strong. Nothing like the half-starved animals Marcus was used to seeing in these parts. They came fast, but not reckless, spreading out as they approached, covering all angles. Marcus set down his tools and walked to the front of the house, making sure his hands were visible and empty. The rifle was inside, leaning against the wall near the door, but reaching for it would be suicide. 20 against 1 were odds even a fool wouldn't take. They stopped 50 feet from the house, and a man rode forward from their center. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore clothing that marked him as someone of importance, and even from this distance, Marcus could feel the weight of authority in how he carried himself. The man's gaze moved from Marcus to the house, to the barn, to the fields beyond, then back to Marcus's face. I am Neshoba. His voice was deep, carrying easily across the distance. And I believe you have my daughter. Marcus's throat was suddenly dry as This was the moment, the point where everything either got better or got much worse. She's inside, wounded but alive. Chayton ran off. 2 of his men are in the barn, 1 dead, 1 tied up. He forced himself to maintain eye contact, to not look away like a guilty man. I did what I could for her injuries, but she needs proper care. Neshoba's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He made a gesture, and 4 warriors dismounted. 2 moved past Marcus into the house, while 2 others headed toward the barn. Marcus didn't try to stop them, just stood there and waited. The wait felt eternal. He could hear movement inside, voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. Then one of the warriors emerged, carrying Kiona in his arms. She was conscious, her head turning to look at her father, and even from where Marcus stood, he could see the relief on her face. The other 2 warriors came out of the barn, dragging the bound prisoner between them. The man was trying to say something pleading or threatening, Marcus couldn't tell. But Neshoba's eyes hardened when he saw him, recognition and rage mixing into something cold. Neshoba dismounted, then moving with the grace of someone half his age. He walked to where his daughter was being laid carefully on a blanket one of the warriors had spread on the ground. He knelt beside her, placing 1 hand on her forehead in a gesture so tender it made Marcus look away, feeling like he was intruding on something private. Father, Kiona's voice was weak but warm. I'm sorry, I should have been more careful. You're alive. Nothing else matters. Neshoba's voice was gentle in a way that seemed impossible given his size and bearing. He stood after a moment and walked toward Marcus, each step deliberate, closing the distance until they were only a few feet apart. Up close, Neshoba was even more imposing, and Marcus had to resist the urge to step back. You saved her. It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. I did what anyone should do when they find someone dying, not anyone. Most men would have walked away. Neshoba's eyes searched Marcus's face, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling of being read like a book with nothing hidden. Most men would have chosen safety over conscience. You chose differently. Why Marcus thought about the debt notice in his pocket, about his dying fields, about all the reasons he should have walked away. About how none of them had mattered in the moment, because leaving her to die wasn't something I could live with. Neshoba was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving past Marcus to take in the ranch. The failing crops, the weathered house, the barn with its sagging roof. When his eyes came back to Marcus, something had shifted in them. You're in debt. Marcus stiffened. That's not your concern. It is now. My daughter's life is worth more than any amount of gold or land or power. Neshoba's voice was firm. You saved her knowing it would bring danger to your door, knowing it could cost you everything. That creates an obligation. I don't want payment for doing what was right, and that is exactly why you deserve it. Neshoba turned and called out something in his language. One of the warriors brought over a leather pouch, the kind used for carrying valuables. The chief took it and held it out to Marcus. Inside is enough gold to settle whatever debts you carry and enough more to plant new crops, repair your buildings, hire help if you need it. Take it. Marcus stared at the pouch, then at Neshoba's face, trying to understand if this was real or some fever dream brought on by exhaustion and stress. I can't accept that. It's too much. You can and you will. Refusing would dishonor both of us. The chief's expression hardened slightly. My daughter explained what you did, how you faced down 3 armed men, how you killed to protect her, how you saved her life twice, once by finding her and once by standing between her and her enemies. That deserves recognition. Marcus's hand reached out almost against his will, taking the pouch. It was heavier than he expected, the weight of it, both literal and symbolic. This was more than money. This was a bond between them, a connection that would follow him for the rest of his life. Behind Neshoba, Kiona was being carefully lifted onto a horse, 2 warriors supporting her. She looked at Marcus and gave a small nod, acknowledgement, or gratitude, or promise. Maybe all 3. What about Chayton? Marcus found his voice finally. He got away, said he'd come back with more men. Chayton will be found. Neshoba's voice went cold. And when he is, he'll answer for what he's done, not just to my daughter, but to our people. The betrayal he planned would have destroyed us. The chief mounted his horse in one smooth motion. You're under our protection now. If Chayton or any of his followers come for you, send word to the Canyonlands in the north. We will answer. How do I send word? Neshoba gestured, and one of the warriors rode forward, a younger man with Neshoba's eyes and bearing. This is Dakota, my son. He will remain here with 5 others to guard you and my daughter while she recovers. Marcus's stomach dropped. She's staying. The wound is too severe for her to travel safely. She needs rest, needs time to heal. Neshoba looked at his daughter, then back to Marcus. You saved her once. I'm trusting you to help her survive until she's strong enough to come home. Then the chief and most of his warriors rode off, heading north, leaving Marcus standing in his yard with a pouch of gold that would change his life and 6 tribal warriors who'd just become his unexpected house guests. Dakota dismounted and approached, extending his hand. The gesture was clearly borrowed from white customs, an attempt at bridge building. My father says you're a man of honor. That's rare enough to deserve respect. Marcus shook his hand, still trying to process everything that had just happened. I'm just a farmer who made a choice that saved my sister's life. Dakota's grip was firm. We won't be any trouble. We'll camp by the creek, stay out of your way. But we'll be watching. If Chayton comes back, he'll have to go through us first. The warriors moved off to set up their camp, and Marcus stood alone in his yard, the pouch of gold heavy in his hand. He opened it, finally peering inside, and had to steady himself against the porch railing. There was more here than enough to pay his debts. There was enough to completely transform his ranch, to buy the equipment he needed, to hire workers, to invest in irrigation systems that might actually keep his crops alive. He walked inside where Kiona had been returned to his bed. She was already asleep, exhausted from being moved, her breathing steady and deep. Marcus sat in the chair beside her, the same chair he'd occupied all night, and looked at the woman who'd crashed into his life like a lightning strike. 24 hours ago, he'd been a failed farmer with 45 days to lose everything. Now he was the protector of a chief's daughter, the target of a tribal power struggle, and the possessor of enough gold to save his ranch and his future. He pulled the debt notice from his pocket, the paper crumpled and stained with sweat. 45 days. He wouldn't need half that now. Could ride into town tomorrow if he wanted, walk into the bank and pay off every cent he owed with gold left over. The thought should have filled him with relief. Instead, he felt something more complex. Gratitude, yes, but also obligation, fear, and underneath it all, a strange sense that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't fully understand yet. Outside, he could hear the warriors setting up camp, their voices low and efficient. Dakota was directing them, making sure guards were posted, ensuring they had clear sight lines to the house and barn. Professional, prepared for violence. Marcus thought about the prisoner still tied up in the barn and realized he needed to deal with that situation. He stood rifle in hand and headed out. The sun was high now, the heat already oppressive, but the warriors seemed unbothered by it. Dakota saw him heading for the barn and fell into step beside him. The one who survived. What has he told you that Chayton's planning wasn't limited to just the three of them? That there are others enough to be a problem? Dakota's jaw tightened. My father suspected as much. That's why he took most of the warriors with him. He's going to root out every man who sided with Chayton, everyone who knew about the betrayal and said nothing. What happens to them? Exile if they're lucky, death if they participated directly. Dakota's voice was matter-of-fact, stating policy rather than making threats. My father is fair, but he doesn't forgive treason. Can't afford to not with so much at stake. They entered the barn and the prisoner looked up, his eyes widening when he saw Dakota. He started speaking rapidly in their shared language, words tumbling over each other in what sounded like pleas or justifications. Dakota listened for a moment, his expression unchanging, then responded with a few short sentences that made the prisoner go pale and silent. What did he say? Marcus asked after they stepped back outside. He claims he was only following Chayton's orders, that he didn't know the full plan, that he's sorry for his actions. Dakota spat in the dust. Lies. This is Maka. He was one of Chayton's inner circle, present at every meeting with the settlement men. My sister saw him there, recognized him from her scouting. So what happens to him? My father will decide, but I doubt mercy will be offered. Dakota looked at Marcus. Does that trouble you? Marcus thought about Talon lying dead under a tarp, about the fight yesterday, about how close he'd come to dying. No, he made his choices. He can live with the consequences. Good, because what's coming won't be clean or simple. Dakota's voice was grim. Chayton won't give up. He's too committed now, too exposed. His only choice is to attack or run, and running isn't in his nature. Then we'll be ready. Marcus surprised himself with the certainty in his voice, like he'd already accepted this was his fight now, not just something he'd stumbled into. The next 3 days fell into an uneasy routine. Marcus spent his mornings attending to Kiona's wounds, changing bandages, helping her drink broth he made from dried beef and vegetables. Her fever broke on the second day, and by the third she was able to sit up and eat solid food. The warriors maintained a perimeter around the property, rotating guard shifts, scouting the surrounding area for signs of Chayton or his followers. They were quiet, respectful of Marcus's space, but always present, always watching. Dakota proved to be good company, speaking English well enough for conversation. He'd spent time at a mission school as a child, he explained, learning white ways to better understand the threats his people faced. Now that knowledge served him well as a bridge between two worlds. On the third evening, Marcus rode into town with the gold Dakota and 2 warriors accompanying him at a discreet distance. The bank manager's face when Marcus emptied the pouch onto his desk was something Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Shock, confusion, then calculation, as he tried to figure out where a failing farmer had gotten this kind of money. Marcus didn't explain, just waited while the man counted out the exact amount owed, took his receipt, marking all debts paid in full, and walked out with his head high for the first time in months. The ride back was quiet. Marcus kept replaying the moment, the feeling of the debt notice being stamped, paid, the sensation of weight lifting off his shoulders. He'd done it, saved the ranch, secured his future, all because he'd found a wounded woman and made the choice to help her instead of walking away. When they got back, Kiona was sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket despite the heat. She'd insisted on coming outside, refusing to spend another minute staring at the bedroom ceiling. Her color was better, the pallor of blood loss fading to something more natural. "You paid them," she said it as Marcus dismounted. It wasn't a question. Every cent, with enough left over to make real improvements. He sat beside her on the porch steps. "Your father's gift saved everything. It wasn't a gift, it was a debt payment." Her voice was firm. "You saved my life, twice. Protected me from men who would have killed both of us. That deserves more than gold. But gold is what we had to offer. I didn't do it for reward." "I know, that's why you deserve it." She shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing wound. "My father sees things clearly. He knew you'd resist accepting help, knew you'd consider it charity. That's why he framed it as debt as obligation, made it harder to refuse. Smart man, the smartest I know." She looked out at the fields, at the dying corn that would be replaced next season with crops better suited to the soil and climate. "What will you do now? Rebuild? Hire help? Actually make this place profitable for the first time in years?" Marcus paused. "And wait to see if Chayton comes back. He will." Kiona's voice was certain. "Men like him don't forgive being humiliated. He'll gather followers, make promises, build an army if he can, and then he'll come for both of us. Then we'll be ready." Dakota's voice came from behind them. He'd approached silently, a skill Marcus was learning to expect from these warriors. "My father sent word this morning. He's found 6 men so far who were part of Chayton's conspiracy. All have confessed under questioning. All have named Chayton as the leader. What happened to them? 3 chose exile. 3 chose to fight and died." Dakota's expression was grim. "But Chayton remains at large, and the settlement men he was working with are still out there. This isn't over." Marcus thought about that, about the web of conspiracy that had led to Kiona bleeding in the dust near his property. About how his simple act of compassion had pulled him into something much larger, something that touched on land rights and power struggles and the future of this entire territory. "How long until your father returns?" "Another week, maybe 2. He's being thorough, making sure every thread of this conspiracy is pulled." Dakota sat on the porch railing. "In the meantime, we watch and we wait." The attack came on the 5th day, just before dawn, when the light was thin and uncertain. Marcus woke to the sound of gunfire, the sharp crack of rifles breaking the morning silence. He grabbed his gun and ran outside, his heart pounding, his mind still foggy with sleep. The warriors were already engaged, firing from defensive positions they'd prepared days earlier. Marcus counted at least 10 attackers, maybe more, spread out in the brush and rocks beyond his property line. They were firing systematically, trying to pin down the defenders while others attempted to flank. Dakota ran past, crouched low, shouting orders in his language. He saw Marcus and pointed toward the house. "Get my sister inside. Reinforce the doors and windows. This is just the first wave." Marcus ran back, finding Kiona already on her feet despite her injury, a knife in her hand. "I can fight." "No, you can't." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the bedroom. "You can barely walk. Stay here, stay down, and let the warriors handle this." She wanted to argue, he could see it in her eyes, but the pain from her wound cut through her pride. She let him guide her back to the bed, though she kept the knife gripped tight. "If they get past Dakota, I won't go quietly. They won't get past him." Marcus said it with more confidence than he felt, then ran to the windows, rifle ready, looking for targets. The fight lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. The attackers were determined but not skilled settlers, recruited by promises of land and gold, not professional fighters. The warriors picked them off methodically, their superior training and position giving them advantage, despite being outnumbered. When it was over, 4 attackers lay dead, 3 had fled wounded, and the rest scattered into the desert. Marcus's ears were ringing from the gunfire, his hands shaking from adrenaline, but he was unhurt. So were all the warriors. Dakota walked through the aftermath, checking bodies, making sure threats were neutralized. When he came back to the house, his expression was dark. "Chayton's recruiting anyone who'll listen. These men were just settlers, farmers like you, promised land and wealth if they helped eliminate the obstacles to expansion. Did they know what they were really fighting for? Doubt it. Chayton's good at telling people what they want to hear, at framing violence as opportunity." Dakota cleaned his rifle with practiced efficiency. "But they chose to attack, chose to try and kill us, so they bear the consequences." Marcus looked at the bodies being dragged away from the property and felt something harden inside him. These men had come to kill him, to finish what Chayton started. They'd forced this fight and they'd lost. Is it always going to be like this? More attacks, more fighting until someone finally wins. Until my father ends Chayton permanently, yes. Dakota met his eyes. This is what protecting my sister means. This is what standing against betrayal costs. Can you handle it? Marcus thought about his debt notice, now marked paid. Thought about his future, his ranch, everything he'd worked for. Thought about Kiona lying wounded in his bed, about the choice he'd made to save her instead of walking away. I already killed one man. Nearly killed more today. I think I've answered that question. Good, because this is only the beginning. Dakota clapped him on the shoulder. But at least now you're committed, no turning back. Marcus knew he was right. The moment he'd picked up Kiona and carried her to safety, he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. His life had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back to the simple existence of a struggling farmer, worried only about debt and drought. Now he was part of something larger, something dangerous, something that might get him killed, but also something that felt for the first time in years like it mattered. The morning after the attack, Marcus found Kiona standing in his kitchen, one hand braced against the counter, the other attempting to pour coffee. She'd managed to get the pot off the stove, but was swaying dangerously, her face pale with the effort. "What are you doing?" He crossed the room, quickly taking the pot from her hand before she could drop it. "Testing my limits." She eased herself into a chair, breathing hard, and finding them, apparently. "You nearly died 5 days ago. You need rest, not coffee expeditions." "I need to be useful." Her jaw was set in a way that told Marcus arguing would be pointless. Lying in bed while others fight battles that are mine to fight, that's worse than any wound. Marcus poured 2 cups and set one in front of her, then took the chair across. Dakota and his warriors handled it. 4 attackers dead, the rest scattered. "We're fine this time. What about next time?" She wrapped both hands around the cup, seeking warmth despite the morning heat already building. "Chayton's not going to stop. Each failure will only make him more desperate, more willing to take risks. Your father's hunting him. Sooner or later he'll find him. Maybe, or maybe Chayton finds us first." She met his eyes. "You need to understand what you're dealing with. Chayton's not just angry, he's cornered. And cornered animals are the most dangerous kind." Marcus thought about the men who'd attacked at dawn, about how they'd been willing to die for promises of land and gold, about how Chayton had somehow convinced them their cause was righteous. "Tell me about him, not the traitor part, the man before that." "What made him this way?" Kiona was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it held answers. "We grew up together. He was 3 winters older, always trying to prove himself, always chasing respect he felt he'd been denied. His father was a great warrior who died in a skirmish with settlers when Chayton was young. After that, he became obsessed with strength, with power, with making sure no one ever looked down on him again." She sipped, her coffee wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. "My father saw potential in him, trained him as a scout, gave him responsibilities. But it was never enough. Chayton wanted to lead, wanted to make decisions, wanted authority he hadn't earned through wisdom or experience. When my father chose others for the council, Chayton took it as a personal insult. So he decided to forge his own path, by selling out his own people." Bitterness crept into her voice. He convinced himself that the old ways were dying, that cooperation with the settlers was the only path to survival. But it wasn't cooperation he sought. It was dominance. He wanted to be the one who controlled access to our lands, who decided which settlers could pass through, who collected tribute from both sides. A middleman feeding on conflict. Exactly. And when I discovered his meetings with the settlement leaders, when I heard him drawing maps of our seasonal camps, I knew he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Marcus refilled both cups, processing this. Chayton wasn't just a traitor, he was a man who'd built an entire identity around resentment and ambition. That made him unpredictable, driven by emotions rather than strategy. How many followers did he have, before your father started arresting them, I mean? My brother says at least 20, maybe more. Young men, mostly warriors, who felt overlooked, who bought into Chayton's vision of strength through ruthlessness. She paused. But also some older men, ones who'd grown tired of my father's careful diplomacy, who wanted aggressive expansion instead of peaceful coexistence. So this isn't just about Chayton. It's about a fundamental split in your people's vision for the future. War or peace? Conquest or cooperation? Old grievances or new possibilities? Kiona looked out the window at the warriors maintaining their perimeter. My father has spent 20 years trying to avoid open conflict with the settlers, trying to find ways for both peoples to share this territory without destroying each other. But Chayton and his followers see that as weakness, as surrender. And now they're forcing the issue. She nodded. If Chayton succeeds in provoking a war, if he can manufacture enough violence and bloodshed, my father's careful diplomacy collapses. The moderates on both sides lose influence, and the extremists take over. That's what he's counting on. Marcus absorbed that understanding for the first time, the true scope of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about one wounded woman or one man's betrayal. This was about the future of an entire region, about whether two peoples could coexist or would tear each other apart. Your father needs to find him soon, before more settlers get recruited, before more attacks happen, before the cycle of violence becomes impossible to stop. The sound of horses approaching made them both tense. Marcus grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, relaxing only when he recognized the rider. Dakota, returning from a scouting mission he'd left on before dawn. The young warrior dismounted and entered without knocking, his face grim. We found their camp, or what's left of it. Chayton moved out 2 days ago, heading east toward the settlements. How many with him? Kiona leaned forward, ignoring the pain the movement caused. Tracks suggest at least 15, maybe 20. He's abandoning stealth for numbers, building an army in the open. Dakota's jaw was tight. My father needs to know. I'm riding north to find him, bring him back before Chayton can launch whatever he's planning. That leaves us with 4 warriors. Marcus did the math quickly. If Chayton comes back with 20 men we can't hold, then we pray he doesn't come back. Dakota looked at his sister. Can you ride yet? Not without tearing open my wound. She said it reluctantly, hating the admission. I'm still weeks away from that kind of exertion. Then you stay here, Marcus stays with you, and my men maintain the perimeter. Dakota moved to the door. I'll be back with our father in 3 days, 4 at most. Hold until then. And if Chayton attacks before you return, Marcus kept his voice level. You make them pay for every inch. Dakota's eyes were hard. My sister is worth 20 of Chayton's hired killers. Don't let him take her. Then he was gone, riding north at a pace that would kill his horse if he maintained it, but would also cut travel time in half. Marcus and Kiona stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the heat shimmer. The ranch felt suddenly more vulnerable, more exposed, with half the warriors gone. 3 days. Marcus said it quietly. We can manage 3 days, if we're lucky. Kiona's voice was steady despite the fear Marcus could see in her eyes. But luck hasn't exactly been on our side lately. The first day passed without incident. The 4 remaining warriors maintained their posts, rotating shifts, staying alert. Marcus worked on reinforcing the house, boarding up windows on the ground floor, creating firing positions that would give them advantage if it came to a siege. Kiona helped where she could, sorting ammunition, preparing the bandages, organizing supplies. She moved carefully, nursing her injury, but Marcus could see her frustration at being limited, at not being able to contribute fully. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed almost violent in their intensity. The heat was finally breaking desert night, bringing the temperature down to something almost bearable. Tell me about your family. Kiona broke the comfortable silence. Your father built this ranch, you said. What was he like? Marcus was quiet for a moment, memories surfacing that he usually kept buried. Stubborn, proud, determined to make something from nothing no matter what it cost him. He picked at a loose board with his boot. He came west after the war, looking for land where a man could build a future. Found this place and decided it was worth dying for. Literally, as it turned out. What happened? Or worked himself to death trying to make dry land profitable. Broke his body, clearing rocks, digging channels, planting crops that had no business growing in this soil. I begged him to slow down, to accept that some things weren't meant to be forced. He wouldn't listen. Marcus's voice was rough with old pain. I found him collapsed in the North Field 5 years ago. Heart just gave out. He was 52 years old and looked 70. I'm sorry, don't be. He made his choices, lived the way he wanted. Marcus met her eyes. I just wish I'd learned the lesson before I started down the same path. Is that what the debt was? Following in his footsteps, trying to honor his legacy by making this place succeed no matter what it took. He laughed without humor. Turns out I'm just as stubborn as he was, just not as strong. Would have lost everything if you hadn't crashed into my life. Some would say that was fate. Kiona's voice was soft. That our paths were meant to cross, that the spirits put me in your path for a reason. And what reason would that be? To remind you that honor matters more than success. That some things are worth more than land or money or legacy. She gestured at the ranch around them. Your father broke himself trying to build this. You were breaking yourself trying to maintain it. Maybe we both needed reminding that survival isn't the same as living. Marcus considered how true it felt. He'd been so focused on not losing the ranch that he'd forgotten what the ranch was supposed to be for. Not a monument to his father's stubbornness, but a home. A place to build a life, not just struggle through one. What about you? What were you doing out there alone, hunting elk in territory you knew was dangerous? Same thing you were doing. She smiled slightly. Following a path I thought I had to follow, proving I was as capable as any warrior, that being a woman didn't mean I couldn't contribute to my people's survival. But maybe I was also running from expectations. My father loves me, but he also sees me as a chess piece in larger games. Potential alliance marriages, diplomatic missions, symbolic gestures. Sometimes I needed to be just Kiona, not Chief Neshoba's daughter. Marcus understood that. The weight of legacy, the pressure of living up to names that came before. They were more alike than he'd realized. For what it's worth, I'm glad you were out there that day. Even if it nearly got us both killed. She reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. So am I. The moment stretched between them, something unspoken but acknowledged. Then one of the warriors called out, breaking the spell, reporting movement in the distance that turned out to be a coyote hunting rabbits. They went inside as full dark fell, and Marcus made dinner from supplies that were running low. They'd need to make a supply run soon, which meant one of them would have to ride to the settlement, leaving the other more vulnerable. Another complication in a situation already drowning in them. The second day was harder. The heat returned with a vengeance, temperatures climbing past anything Marcus had experienced even in high summer. The warriors rationed water carefully, but the well was running dangerously low, and the creek where they'd been supplementing was down to a muddy trickle. Kiona's wound showed signs of infection despite Marcus's careful cleaning. Not serious yet, but worrying. She developed a low fever that afternoon, nothing like the dangerous heat of those first days, but enough to weaken her, to make her sleep restlessly and wake disoriented. Marcus sat with her through the worst of it, changing bandages, forcing her to drink water, applying cool cloths to her forehead. The infection needed proper medicine, the kind only a doctor would have, but the nearest doctor was 3 days away in the settlement. Too far, too dangerous to attempt right now. One of the warriors, an older man named Ahiga, brought herbs from their camp. Plants Marcus didn't recognize, but that Ahiga explained would help fight the infection. They made a poultice from crushed leaves and roots, applying it directly to the wound, and within hours the fever began to drop. Marcus watched the warrior work with practiced hands, his knowledge of medicine clearly extensive. You've done this before, many times. Warriors get wounded, infections happen, doctors are rare. Ahiga didn't look up from his work. My grandmother taught me the healing arts when I was young. Said every warrior should know how to mend what gets broken, not just how to break things. Marcus thought about his own grandmother, who died when he was 10, who'd known remedies for common ailments, but nothing like this level of expertise. Thank you for helping her. She's worth helping. Ahiga met his eyes. And so are you for choosing to help her when you had no obligation. That speaks to character. I'm not sure character had much to do with it. Just seemed like the right thing. The right thing is often the hardest thing. Ahiga finished wrapping the fresh bandage. That's why so few people choose it. By evening, Kiona's fever had broken completely, and she was resting comfortably. Marcus sat on the porch again, rifle across his lap, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. 2 days down, 1 to go. If they could just make it through one more day, Dakota would return with Neshoba and enough warriors to ensure safety. One more day. It felt both impossibly far and dangerously close. The attack came at dawn on the third day, just like before, but this time there was no advance warning. No sound of horses, no glimpse of movement, just sudden gunfire from 3 sides at once, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through speed and shock. Marcus rolled out of bed, grabbed his rifle, and ran for the door. Outside, chaos. The warriors were already engaged, returning fire, but they were badly outnumbered. Marcus counted at least 20 attackers, maybe more, positioned in cover they must have taken up during the night. This wasn't random settlers hired with promises. These were Chayton's core followers, experienced fighters who knew what they were doing, the kind of men who killed for conviction rather than coin. Ahiga took a bullet in the shoulder and went down hard. Marcus ran to him, dragging him behind cover while bullets kicked up dirt all around them. The wound was bad bones showing through torn flesh, blood pumping steadily. "Get inside," Ahiga gasped through pain. "Protect Nashoba's daughter, that's what matters." Marcus hesitated, torn between helping the wounded warrior and following orders. Another bullet whined past his head, close enough to feel the wind of its passage, and made the decision for him. He ran for the house, slamming the door behind him and dropping the bar into place. Kiona was already up, armed with a rifle one of the warriors had given her, positioned at a window. Her face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead from fever and exertion, but her hands were steady. "How many? 20 at least. They've got Ahiga pinned down and the others are falling back to secondary positions." Marcus took position at another window, sighting down his rifle at a figure moving between rocks. "This is it, the real attack. Where's my brother? He should be back by now." "Not yet. We're on our own." They fought for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. The attackers pressed hard, trying to overwhelm through numbers, but the house's defensible position and limited entry points gave the defenders advantage. Bodies began to pile up in the yard. Attackers made desperate rushes that ended in gunfire and death. Then smoke began rising from the barn. "They're burning us out." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Force us into the open where they can pick us off." The barn had most of their supplies, their ammunition reserves, the horse he'd need to ride for help if this went wrong. Losing it meant losing any chance of escape or reinforcement. "I have to stop them." Marcus moved toward the door. "You're insane." Kiona grabbed his arm. "You step outside, you're dead in seconds. If I stay inside, we burn or starve. Those are the only options Chayton's leaving us." He met her eyes, seeing the fear there, the protest she wanted to make. "I'm not dying in here like a cornered rat. Better to go down fighting. Then I'm coming with you." "No," his voice was firm. "You can barely stand. You stay here, keep firing, make them think we're both still inside. I'll use that distraction to reach the barn." Before she could argue further, he slipped out the back door, moving low and fast toward the barn. Bullets immediately chewed up the ground around him, but he kept running, zigzagging, making himself a harder target. He made it to the barn door and ducked inside. Smoke was already thick flames climbing the dry wood of the back wall where someone had tossed a torch. Marcus grabbed a blanket and started beating at the flames, trying to smother them before they spread. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. Marcus spun, raising his rifle, then recognized the build, the posture, the scar on the face. Chayton, the man he'd thought fled, the architect of this entire disaster, standing 10 feet away with a knife in one hand and murder in his eyes. "You should have let her die." Chayton's voice was rough with smoke and rage. "Should have walked away, saved yourself all this trouble. But you had to be a hero." Marcus kept his rifle level, finger on the trigger. "I don't murder wounded women." "Maybe that makes me weak in your eyes. It makes you dead." Chayton lunged, moving faster than Marcus expected. The rifle went off, the shot going wide as Chayton batted the barrel aside. Then they were grappling, fighting hand to hand in the smoke-filled barn, flames climbing higher around them. Chayton was younger, stronger, more experienced at this kind of fighting. But Marcus was desperate, fighting for his life, and for Kiona's, and for everything he'd chosen to stand for. That desperation gave him strength he didn't know he had. They crashed into a support post, rolled across the floor, each trying to gain advantage. Chayton's knife came up, aiming for Marcus's throat, and Marcus caught his wrist with both hands. They strained against each other, muscles trembling with effort, the blade inching closer to Marcus's neck. Then a gunshot, deafening in the enclosed space. Chayton jerked and stumbled back, red spreading across his chest. He looked down at the wound, confused, then his legs gave out and he collapsed. Behind him, Kiona stood in the doorway, rifle smoking in her hands. Blood was seeping through her bandages from the exertion of getting here, of making the shot, but her aim had been true. She swayed and Marcus lunged forward to catch her before she fell. They stumbled out of the barn together as the flames engulfed the structure, timber groaning and collapsing in showers of sparks. The gunfire from outside had stopped. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader dead and the defenders still standing had broken and run. The three surviving warriors were checking bodies, securing the perimeter, making sure the threat was truly ended. Marcus lowered Kiona to the ground, leaning her against the house. Her breathing was labored sweat coating her face, but her eyes were alert. "You came out there. I told you I wouldn't let you die alone." She managed a weak smile. "Besides, you're terrible at hand-to-hand combat. Needed someone to save you." "You're insane. You nearly tore your wound open completely." "Worth it." She closed her eyes, exhausted. "Is he dead?" "Yes." Marcus looked back at the burning barn, at Chayton's body somewhere in that inferno. "It's over." But even as he said it, he wondered if that was true. Chayton was dead, but the conspiracy he'd built, the tensions he'd inflamed, those wouldn't die so easily. The future remained uncertain, balanced on a knife's edge between peace and open war. Hoofbeats approaching made Marcus grab his rifle again, but then he saw the riders. Dakota at their head, Neshoba beside him, and at least 30 warriors behind them. They'd arrived just minutes too late for the fight, but in time to see the aftermath. Neshoba dismounted and ran to his daughter, kneeling beside her, checking her wounds with gentle hands. When he looked up at Marcus, there was something in his eyes that went beyond gratitude. "You protected her again, at great cost." He gestured at the burning barn, at the bodies scattered across the property. Marcus shook his head, too exhausted to form proper words. "She saved me, shot Chayton when he had me beaten." "Then you saved each other." Neshoba helped his daughter to her feet, supporting her weight. "That's a bond that goes deeper than debt or obligation." He called out orders in his language, and warriors moved to help the wounded, to collect the dead, to secure the property. Marcus just stood there watching his barn burn, too tired to feel anything beyond a numb relief that it was finally over. Dakota approached, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. "We found where Chayton had been hiding, a cave system in the eastern canyons. He'd been storing weapons there, planning something bigger than we realized." Marcus didn't want to know what bigger meant. Didn't want to think about what would have happened if Chayton had succeeded in whatever larger plan he'd been building toward. The main barn was a total loss. They managed to save Marcus's horse and some supplies before the structure fully collapsed, but everything else was gone. Tools, stored grain equipment that had been his father's and his grandfather's before that. Reduced to ash and memory, but he was alive. Kiona was alive, and Chayton was dead. In the balance of what mattered, Marcus supposed they'd come out ahead. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the smoke and illuminating the destruction, Marcus sat on what remained of his porch and let himself feel the weight of the past week. Finding Kiona, the first fight, the debt paid, the attacks, the final confrontation. It felt like years compressed into days, like he'd aged a decade while the calendar moved barely a week. Neshoba approached and sat beside him without asking permission. They sat in silence for a while, two men who'd been changed by events neither had controlled, but both had survived. "My daughter says you're a good man." The chief's voice was quiet. "That you fought beside her, protected her, treated her with honor, even when it cost you everything." Marcus gestured at the smoking ruins. "Didn't exactly protect her very well. Nearly got her killed multiple times, but you didn't walk away. You could have many times, but you chose to stand." Neshoba paused. "That kind of courage is rare." It didn't feel like courage. Felt like stubbornness and poor decision-making. Often the same thing. Neshoba almost smiled. "My daughter also says you've proven worthy of trust." High praise from someone who trusts few. Marcus didn't know how to respond to that, so he stayed quiet. "I'm rebuilding the barn," Neshoba said it matter-of-factly. "My people will provide materials and labor. It's the least I can do after your home became a battlefield in my people's conflict. You've already done more than enough. The debt was paid, the gold covered everything I owed. Then consider this a gesture of friendship." The chief met his eyes. "You're part of our circle now, whether you intended to be or not. That comes with obligations, yes, but also with support. We take care of our own." Marcus absorbed that understanding. He'd just been offered something more valuable than gold. Protection. Alliance, belonging to something larger than himself. "I appreciate that, more than you know." They stood together, watching the warriors work, organizing the cleanup, tending to wounds, preparing to transport the dead. Efficiency born from too much practice, too many battles fought and survived. Kiona appeared in the doorway, having been ordered by one of the healers to rest, but clearly unable to stay still. She saw her father and Marcus together, and smiled, something warm and knowing in the expression. Planning my future without consulting me, never. Neshoba walked to her, kissed her forehead gently, merely ensuring your stubborn farmer friend understands he's not alone anymore. He's not my farmer. Her protest was automatic, but the blush on her cheeks suggested otherwise. Just someone who happened to save my life and fight beside me and nearly die protecting me. Nothing significant. Nothing significant. Neshoba agreed, but his eyes were laughing. I'm taking you home now. You need proper healing, proper rest, proper care. I'm fine, you're barely standing. He gestured to two warriors who brought over a makeshift litter. Don't argue. I may respect your strength, but I'm still your father, and I outrank you. Kiona looked like she wanted to protest further, but was too exhausted to manage it. She let them help her onto the litter, settling in with obvious relief despite her reluctance to show weakness. Before they lifted her, she looked at Marcus. Thank you for everything, for not walking away when you should have, for standing beside me when you had every reason to run, for being someone worth knowing. The words hit deeper than Marcus expected, carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. You saved me too, in more ways than just the barn. He didn't fully understand what he meant by that, but it felt true. I'll see you again. She said it with certainty. This isn't the end of our story. Then they carried her away, and Marcus was left standing in the ruins of his barn, his ranch, his old life, knowing she was right. Something had begun here, something neither of them fully understood yet, but both recognized as significant. Neshoba remained behind with a dozen warriors overseeing the cleanup and beginning the reconstruction. True to his word, materials started arriving that afternoon. Lumber, nails, tools, everything needed to rebuild what had been destroyed. Marcus worked alongside them, sweat soaking his shirt muscles, burning with familiar exhaustion. But this was different from the lonely struggle of before. This was shared labor, communal effort, working towards something that mattered beyond just survival. By nightfall, the framework of a new barn was already taking shape. Larger than the old, one better constructed, built to last. A symbol of what could be built when people chose cooperation over conflict. As Marcus lay down that night, too tired to even remove his boots, he thought about everything that had changed. A week ago, he'd been a failing farmer, with crushing debt and no future. Now he was something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. Connected to people he'd never expected to know, part of conflicts he'd never sought, living a life he'd never imagined. But somehow, despite the violence and danger and loss, it felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. More purposeful, more alive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The conspiracy might be broken, but the tensions that fed it remained. The careful balance between settlers and native peoples would continue to be tested. There would be more threats, more dangers, more choices that would define who he was and who he would become. But tonight he could rest, knowing he'd made the choices that mattered. He'd chosen compassion over fear, honor over safety, connection over isolation. And whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. 3 weeks after the battle, Marcus stood in his new barn and marveled at what collective will could accomplish. The structure was twice the size of what had burned, with proper ventilation, reinforced beams, and a loft space that could store an entire season's harvest. Neshoba's warriors had worked alongside him every day, teaching him construction techniques he'd never learned, sharing knowledge accumulated over generations. The debt he'd paid to the bank felt insignificant compared to what he owed these people now. But when he tried to express that to Dakota, the young warrior had just shaken his head. You fought beside us, bled with us, protected my sister when her own people tried to kill her. That makes you family, and family doesn't keep ledgers. Family. The words settled into Marcus's chest with unexpected weight. He'd been alone for so long, defined by loss and isolation, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to belong to something larger than himself. The sound of approaching horses drew him from the barn. A group of riders, but these weren't warriors. These were settlers from the nearby town, led by a man Marcus recognized as Thomas Whitmore, who owned the general store and sat on the town council. Marcus grabbed his rifle automatically, old habits dying hard, but Dakota emerged from the house and waved him down. These ones are friendly. They've been asking to speak with you. Whitmore dismounted, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. The 5 men with him stayed mounted, their faces showing the same uneasy mix of curiosity and wariness. Mr. Brennan, I hope we're not intruding. Marcus leaned the rifle against the barn wall, making a show of appearing relaxed, even as every instinct told him to stay alert. Depends on why you're here. To talk if you are willing. Whitmore gestured at the barn at the warriors working nearby. Words spread about what happened here. About Chayton's conspiracy, about the attacks you survived, about your alliance with Chief Neshoba's people. Alliance. Marcus tested the word. That's one way to put it. It's the way most folks in the territory are putting it. Whitmore's voice was careful. Some are worried about what it means. Others are curious. A few are hoping it might mean a path forward that doesn't end in war. What do you want straight talk if you'll give it? How did a farmer like you end up in the middle of tribal politics? And more importantly, can it happen again? Marcus considered sending them away, avoiding complications that would inevitably follow any conversation about the delicate balance between peoples. But then he thought about Kiona, about the choices that had led him here, about the responsibility that came with those choices. I found someone dying and chose to help. That's all. No grand plan, no political calculation. Just one person helping another. And nearly got killed for it. One of the other riders spoke up, a younger man Marcus didn't recognize. Several times from what we heard. Marcus met his eyes. Would you have done differently? Let her die to avoid trouble. The man had no answer to that, and at least none he was willing to speak aloud. The trouble came because of betrayal within Neshoba's own people. Marcus continued, his voice steady. Men who wanted power more than peace. Men willing to sell out their own for gold and influence. Sound familiar? Whitmore shifted uncomfortably, understanding the implication. The settlement had its own share of ambitious men who'd sacrifice anything for profit. So what happens now, you've got tribal warriors living on your property, working your land. That's unprecedented. Some folks are scared it's the beginning of something larger. It's the beginning of cooperation instead of conflict, of people choosing to help each other instead of killing each other. Marcus surprised himself with the passion in his voice. I was dying out here before this happened. Land failing, debt crushing me, no future visible. Now I've got a barn that'll stand for 50 years, friends who will defend me with their lives, and hope that tomorrow might be better than today. If that scares people, they need to examine their priorities. Whitmore was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough, some of us on the council were hoping your example might open doors, create opportunities for trade, for dialogue, for finding common ground before more blood gets spilled. Then support it. Marcus straightened. Stop treating Neshoba's people like threats to be eliminated and start treating them like neighbors to be respected. You'll be surprised what becomes possible. The riders left shortly after, and Marcus knew the conversation would be repeated throughout the territory. Some would hear it as naive optimism, others as dangerous sympathy with the enemy. But maybe a few would hear it as what it was intended to be, a call for something better than the cycle of violence and suspicion that had defined this land for too long. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Kiona returned. Marcus was working on the fence line when he saw her riding across the field, accompanied by only 2 guards instead of the usual larger escort. She sat her horse with easy confidence. The weakness from her injury finally burned away by time and healing. His heart did something complicated in his chest, a mixture of relief and anticipation, and something else he wasn't ready to name yet. She dismounted near the house, and Marcus walked over, trying to appear casual, despite the fact that he'd thought about her every day since she'd left. You're healed, mostly. She touched her side where the wound had been. Still sore when I moved wrong, but functional. The healers finally declared me well enough to travel without destroying their hard work. Couldn't stay away from the excitement. Something like that. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. And I wanted to see what you'd built with my father's help. Marcus showed her the barn, the new irrigation system, the improvements to the house. She walked through it all with genuine interest, asking questions about construction methods, complimenting the craftsmanship, noting details he thought no one would notice. When they finished the tour, they sat on the porch as darkness fell and the desert cooled. The guards remained at a respectful distance, present but not intrusive. My father speaks highly of you. Kiona broke the comfortable silence. Says you've proven yourself worthy of trust and respect. Coming from him, that's significant. He's done more for me than I can ever repay. That's not how he sees it. He believes you saved his daughter's life and his people's future by stopping Chayton's conspiracy. She paused. He's not wrong. I just did what seemed right at the time. Marcus's voice was quiet. Didn't think about futures or politics or consequences. Just saw someone who needed help. That's what makes it meaningful. She turned to face him. You didn't help because you wanted something. You helped because you couldn't do otherwise. That kind of integrity is rare. Marcus felt heat rise in his face, uncomfortable with praise he didn't feel he'd earned. You would have done the same if our positions were reversed. Maybe, but we'll never know, will we? All we know is what actually happened, and what happened is that you chose compassion over safety, honor over self-preservation. She reached over and took his hand, the gesture simple but carrying weight. I wanted to thank you properly, not just for the rescue or the protection, but for reminding me that there are still good people in this world, people worth fighting for. Marcus looked at their joined hands, feeling the calluses on her palm that matched his own marks of lives, lived through hard work and harder choices. I should be thanking you for shooting Chayton when he had me beaten, for forcing me to see beyond the narrow confines of my dying ranch and failed dreams. So we saved each other. Her voice was soft. Seems fair. They sat like that as stars emerged overhead, the vast desert sky putting on its nightly display. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this settled, this much at peace with where he was and who he was with. Eventually, practical matters intruded. Kiona and her guards needed accommodations for the night. Marcus offered his house, but she refused, insisting on camping with her warriors. Independence was important to her, he was learning. She'd accept help when necessary, but never become dependent. The next morning, Dakota arrived with news that changed everything. Raiders hit the settlement last night, burned 3 buildings, killed 2 men, stole horses and supplies. He dismounted quickly, his face grim. The council is blaming our people, calling it revenge for Chayton's death. But your father already dealt with Chayton's followers. Marcus felt cold dread settling in. Most of them, yes, but some escaped north before we could capture them. Dakota's jaw was tight. And now they're making good on Chayton's original plan, provoke a war by making it look like our people are attacking settlers. Kiona swore in her language, something harsh and frustrated. This is exactly what Chayton wanted. Even dead, he's winning. Not if we stop it. Marcus grabbed his rifle. We need to prove your people weren't involved, show the settlement who's really responsible. How track the raiders, capture them, bring them to justice in front of witnesses from both sides. Dakota looked skeptical. The trail will be cold by now, and even if we find them, the settlement won't trust evidence provided by us. Then we bring someone they do trust. Marcus thought quickly. Thomas Whitmore from the town council. He came here yesterday asking about cooperation. Let's give him a chance to prove he meant it. Within the hour, they'd assembled a tracking party, Marcus, Kiona, Dakota, 3 warriors, and surprisingly Thomas Whitmore himself, who'd agreed to come when Marcus explained the stakes. The trail led north into broken canyon country terrain that favored ambush and made tracking difficult. But Dakota and his warriors were experts reading signs Marcus couldn't see, following traces invisible to untrained eyes. They found the raiders' camp on the second day, hidden in a box canyon with only one way in or out. 6 men all wearing tribal clothing, but moving with the awkwardness of people pretending to be something they weren't. Marcus recognized one of them, James Callahan, a settler who'd been advocating for aggressive expansion into tribal lands for years. Seeing him dressed in stolen clothing, trying to masquerade as native to justify violence against native peoples, made Marcus's blood boil. They're not warriors, Dakota's voice was disgusted. They're settlers playing dress-up, trying to start a war that'll profit them. Whitmore saw it too, his face going pale as he understood the implications. Callahan's been pushing for military intervention, claiming native raids justified force. If he's behind the attacks himself, manufacturing evidence to support his agenda, then he's no better than Chayton. Kiona finished. Worse maybe because he's attacking his own people to justify attacking mine. We need to capture them alive. Marcus kept his voice low. Callahan tried to bluff, claiming they were settlers defending themselves from tribal aggression, but his story fell apart when Dakota found the stolen horses and supplies, including items clearly marked as belonging to settlement families. Whitmore stared at Callahan with disgust. You killed your own people, burned their homes, stole from them. To what end? To prove we need military protection to justify taking tribal lands, to create opportunities for men willing to seize them. Callahan's voice was defiant, even in defeat. This territory's too valuable to let savages control it. Someone had to force the issue. So you became the monster you claimed to be fighting against. Marcus felt sick. You're worse than Chayton ever was. At least he believed he was helping his people. You're just feeding on hate and fear for profit. History will prove me right. Callahan's eyes were cold. This land will be settled by white men, and your native friends will be footnotes. I'm just accelerating the inevitable. Kiona moved fast, her fist connecting with Callahan's jaw before anyone could stop her. He went down, hard blood pouring from his mouth, and she stood over him with fury in her eyes. You know nothing about inevitability. My people have survived for thousands of years while empires rose and fell. We'll survive you too. They bound the raiders and started the journey back to the settlement. The trip took 3 days, moving slowly to prevent escape attempts, stopping frequently to rest horses pushed hard by the weight of prisoners and supplies. During one of these stops, Marcus found himself walking with Kiona, putting distance between themselves and the rest of the group. What happens when we get back? Marcus asked. Best case, Callahan and his people stand trial, get convicted, and the settlement sees that cooperation with my father's people is possible. She paused. Worst case, some factions refuse to believe the evidence, use it as excuse for escalation, and we're right back where we started. What do you think will happen? Honestly, something in between. Some will accept the truth, others will reject it. The territory will remain divided, tense, one wrong move away from violence. She looked at him. But maybe that's progress. Maybe avoiding open war is the best we can hope for right now. Seems like a low bar. It is, but it's better than the alternative. They walked in silence for a while, then Kiona spoke again, her voice softer. When this is over, when we've delivered these men and told our story, I need to go back to my father's camp for a while. There are political matters that need my attention, obligations I've been neglecting. Marcus felt something sink in his chest but nodded. I understand, but I'll come back. She stopped walking and faced him fully. If you want me to. The question hung between them, carrying implications they'd both been avoiding. This wasn't just about friendship or alliance anymore. This was something deeper. Something that scared Marcus because it mattered so much. I want you to. His voice was rough. More than I know how to express. Good. She smiled, genuine and warm. Because I'm tired of pretending this is just political alliance or strategic friendship. You matter to me, Marcus Brennan, in ways that have nothing to do with my father or tribal politics or any of the complications that brought us together. You matter to me, too. Marcus stepped closer. I spent so long just trying to survive, to not lose everything, that I forgot what it felt like to actually want something beyond mere survival. You remind me there's more to life than just hanging on. Then let's stop hanging on and start living. She closed the distance between them and they kissed as the desert sun beat down and the world continued spinning, indifferent to human drama, but somehow more beautiful for the connection happening in its midst. The arrival at the settlement caused immediate uproar. Some demanded the raiders be lynched on the spot. Others wanted to reject the charges, claiming tribal conspiracy. But Whitmore stood firm, presenting the evidence he'd witnessed personally, staking his reputation on the truth of what they'd found. The territorial marshal was summoned, a trial was convened, evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and slowly, painfully, justice began to emerge from the chaos. Callahan was convicted of murder, arson, theft, and conspiracy to incite war. His sentence was death by hanging, to be carried out immediately. The other raiders received varying sentences based on their level of participation, but all faced significant prison time. Marcus watched the hanging from a distance, feeling no satisfaction in Callahan's death, but recognizing its necessity. Some crimes were too severe to allow mercy, some people too dangerous to permit survival. Neshoba attended the execution, standing with the Marcus and Kiona, his presence a statement about cooperation and justice transcending tribal boundaries. His being there witnessing white man's law applied to white men who tried to destroy peace sent a message that resonated throughout the territory. As the crowd dispersed and normal life attempted to resume, Neshoba pulled Marcus aside. You've done more for my people than you know, not just by saving my daughter or stopping Chayton, but by showing that bridge building is possible, that men of honor exist on both sides of the divan. I just stumbled into all this. Can't claim any grand vision or strategy. The best things often happen that way. Neshoba's smile was slight but genuine. My daughter speaks highly of you. More than highly, actually. She believes you're worthy of trust, of respect, of consideration. The pause before that last word was deliberate, loaded with implication. Marcus felt his face heat. Your daughter is remarkable. Strong, brave, principled. I'm honored by her regard. Is that all? Neshoba's eyes were sharp. Just honored? Marcus met his gaze directly, refusing to hide behind polite evasions. No, sir. It's more than that. She matters to me in ways I'm still learning to understand. If that's inappropriate given our circumstances, I apologize, but I won't lie about it. Neshoba studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. I respect honesty more than propriety. But you should know that pursuing my daughter comes with complications. Political ramifications, cultural challenges, resistance from both our peoples. I know. And despite knowing you're still interested, yes. Why? Because she makes me want to be better than I am. Because she reminds me that honor and courage aren't abstract concepts but lived choices. Because I can't imagine my future without her in it. Marcus paused. But if you forbid it, I'll respect your wishes. She's your daughter and I won't come between you. Neshoba laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. Forbid you've met Kiona, yes. She makes her own choices regardless of what anyone forbids. I could order her away from you, and she'd probably move onto your property out of spite. So you're giving permission. I'm saying I won't stand in your way. Whether this works, whether you can bridge the gaps between your worlds, that's for you to determine. The chief's expression grew serious. But know this, you harm her in any way, and the alliance between us ends. Permanently and violently. Understood. Neshoba extended his hand and they shook on terms unspoken, but clearly understood. This was approval conditional but real for Marcus to pursue a future that weeks ago he couldn't have imagined. 2 months later, Marcus stood in his rebuilt barn and took inventory of changes both physical and internal. The ranch was thriving in ways his father never achieved. New irrigation systems made crops viable. The barn held enough stored grain to last through winter with surplus to sell. The fences were solid, the equipment functional, the animals healthy. But more than that, he'd changed. The desperate, isolated man who'd found a dying woman in the desert was gone, replaced by someone connected to a larger community, someone with purpose beyond mere survival. Kiona visited regularly, sometimes staying for days, sometimes just passing through. Their relationship deepened with each encounter, moving from careful friendship to something neither had words for, but both recognized as significant. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, shared meals and work, and silence built a connection that transcended the cultural boundaries supposedly dividing them. Dakota became a frequent presence too, teaching Marcus tracking skills and hunting techniques, learning in return about farming methods and irrigation engineering. A genuine friendship developed built on mutual respect and shared humor. Even Neshoba visited occasionally, always with warriors, but increasingly comfortable on Marcus's land. The chief and Marcus would sit on the porch and talk about politics and weather and the future, finding common ground in their shared desire for peace and prosperity. The territory remained tense, nowhere near the resolution both men hoped for. But the violence decreased. Trade increased. Dialogue happened more frequently. Small victories accumulated into something that might eventually become lasting peace. One evening, as autumn began cooling the desert heat, Kiona arrived unannounced. She dismounted and walked straight to where Marcus was working on the irrigation pump, her face serious. My father wants to formalize the alliance between our peoples, create actual treaties, establish trade agreements, mark boundaries both sides will respect. That's good. Long overdue, actually. He wants you involved, as witness, as intermediary, as bridge between worlds. She paused. It's a significant responsibility. Years of work, constant negotiation, dealing with hardliners on both sides who'll resist any cooperation. Marcus set down his tools and looked at her. What do you want? I want you to say yes. Her voice was steady. I want you beside me for this work because you understand both sides, because you've earned trust people rarely give, because you make me believe this impossible task might actually be achievable. What about us? His question was direct. How do we navigate a relationship while being public figures in a political alliance? How do we keep something personal when everything becomes symbolic? Carefully. Honestly, by remembering why we're doing this, she stepped closer. We're not trying to build some utopia. We're just trying to make tomorrow slightly less violent than today, to create space where people can choose cooperation over conflict. If we can do that while building something meaningful between us, isn't it worth trying? Marcus thought about his father, who'd broken himself trying to force prosperity from unwilling land. Thought about himself, who'd nearly done the same until circumstances forced a different path. Thought about the choice he'd made weeks ago to help a dying woman instead of walking away. Every significant choice in his life had come from following conscience over convenience, heart over head. This choice felt the same. Yes, he took her hands. I'm in. For the alliance, for the work, for whatever comes. And for you, if you'll have me, I'll have you. She smiled, and in that moment, the desert sunset painted them both in gold and shadow. Two people from different worlds choosing to build a bridge between them. The treaty negotiations took 6 months. Marcus attended every meeting, sometimes as mediator, sometimes as witness, sometimes just as the man who'd proven bridge building was possible. He learned patience. He'd never possessed diplomacy. He'd never studied compromise. He'd always resisted. The final document was imperfect, full of provisions, both sides resented, requiring concessions nobody wanted to make. But it was also historic, the first formal agreement between Neshoba's people and the territory's settlers, establishing boundaries, trade rights, dispute resolution mechanisms, and mutual defense obligations. The signing ceremony was held on neutral ground, attended by chiefs and council members, warriors and settlers, people who weeks earlier wouldn't have been in the same room without violence erupting. Marcus stood beside Kiona as both sides signed, feeling the weight of what they'd helped build. Not perfect, never perfect, but better than the alternative of endless conflict. After, as people dispersed to celebrate or grumble depending on their perspective, Neshoba approached Marcus and Kiona together. You've both done well, better than I dared hope. The chief's voice carried genuine pride. This treaty won't solve everything. In fact, it'll probably create new problems we haven't anticipated. But it's a foundation, something to build on. That's all we can ask for. Marcus felt exhausted but satisfied. Small steps towards something better. Sometimes small steps are the only kind that last. Neshoba looked at his daughter, then at Marcus. I assume you two are going to make your relationship official at some point? Or do I need to keep pretending I don't notice you sneaking off together? Kiona's face flushed. Father, you're adults. You've earned the right to make your own choices. He smiled slightly. But for the record, I approve. Marcus has proven himself worthy of my daughter in every way that matters. Marcus felt something release in his chest, a tension he had been carrying without fully acknowledging. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. Just don't make me regret it. Neshoba's tone was light, but his eyes were serious. She's the most precious thing in my world. Treat her accordingly. Always. The chief left them there, and Marcus turned to Kiona. So, making it official. Any thoughts on that? Many thoughts. She took his hand. But they all lead to the same conclusion, yes. Whatever official means for us, whatever complications it brings, yes. They married in spring in a ceremony that blended traditions from both cultures, witnessed by people from both communities. It was uncomfortable for some, controversial for others, but also powerful in its symbolism. Two people from different worlds choosing to build something together. Marcus's ranch became a gathering place, neutral ground, where settlers and natives could meet, trade, resolve disputes, build relationships. What had been his father's dying dream became something neither man could have imagined, a bridge between peoples, maintained by daily acts of courage and compromise. The first year was hardest. Old hatreds didn't disappear with treaty signatures. Violence still erupted. Conflicts still arose. Misunderstandings still threatened fragile peace. But each time Marcus and Kiona, and those who believed in their vision, worked to calm tensions, find solutions, remind people that cooperation served everyone better than conflict. Slowly, impossibly slowly, it worked. Trade routes opened. Mixed communities formed. Children from both sides played together while parents watched warily but without immediate violence. Progress measured in inches, but moving forward nonetheless. 3 years after the treaty signing, Marcus stood on his porch and watched the sunset over fields that finally prospered. Kiona stood beside him, her hand resting on her swollen belly, their first child due within weeks. Thinking about your father? She read him accurately and as always. Always, Marcus slipped his arm around her waist, wondering what he'd think of all this. The ranch thriving, the alliance holding me married to a chief's daughter and about to become a father myself. He'd be proud. Maybe confused, definitely surprised, but proud. She leaned into him. You did what he tried to do, built something lasting. You just did it differently than he imagined. With a lot of help. With the right help, she corrected. You can't build bridges alone. That's the whole point. They stood there as darkness fell and in stars emerged, two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances and built something that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. The child came 2 weeks later, a daughter they named Sarah after Marcus's mother, and gave a second name in Neshoba's language that meant Hope Bridge. She was healthy and loud and perfect, and when Marcus held her for the first time, he felt something click into place in his soul. This was what his father had really been working toward, though he'd never understood it. Not land ownership or crop yields or financial success, family, legacy, belonging to something that mattered beyond yourself. The ranch was just land. The treaty was just paper. What mattered was the connections built between people, the trust established through actions, the hope that tomorrow could be better if enough people chose to make it so. Marcus had stumbled into this truth by accident, by choosing compassion over fear in a moment when walking away would have been easier. But accidents sometimes revealed destinies, and he couldn't imagine any other path that would have led him here. As his daughter slept in his arms, and his wife recovered nearby, and his neighbors, both settler and native, came to offer congratulations and support, Marcus understood that some debts could never be measured in currency. They were measured in lives, changed futures, built hope maintained against all odds. He'd set out to save his father's ranch and ended up saving himself. Ended up part of something larger, something that might actually mark him in the long arc of history, not through grand gestures or heroic battles, though those had their place, but through daily choices to treat people as human beings, worthy of respect, to honor commitments, even when difficult, to build bridges instead of walls. The innocent should not hang. That was the principle that had started all this, the moment when Marcus had cut down 7 women and chosen to stand against injustice. Everything else had followed from that choice: the alliance with Neshoba, the conflict with Chayton, the treaty negotiations, his relationship with Kiona, this child now sleeping in his arms. One choice made in a moment of clarity had rewritten his entire future. As Neshoba arrived to meet his granddaughter, as Dakota followed with warriors bearing gifts, as neighbors gathered to celebrate new life in a territory still learning peace, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he'd thought lost forever. Genuine hope for tomorrow. The territory would face challenges. Violence would flare again. The treaty would be tested repeatedly. Nothing was guaranteed, nothing was permanent, but standing here surrounded by people from both communities who'd chosen cooperation over conflict, Marcus believed that hope was justified. His father had died trying to force the land to yield. Marcus had learned a different lesson. Some things can't be forced. They have to be grown slowly and carefully tended, with patience and faith. Peace was like that. Trust was like that. Family was like that. And love, he'd discovered, was the same. It couldn't be forced or rushed or demanded. It had to be earned through actions, maintained through choices, protected through commitment. He'd found it in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely person, in the middle of conflict and chaos. But maybe that was how the best things always happen. Not through careful planning, but through choosing right over easy, honor over safety, connection over isolation. The sun set fully and the party moved inside, people cramming into the house that had once felt empty and now felt vibrant with life. Marcus passed his daughter to her grandfather and watched Neshoba's face transform with wonder, the stern chief becoming a gentle grandfather in an instant. Kiona appeared at his side, still weak from childbirth, but determined to be present. What are you thinking about everything? Nothing. How different life is from what I expected. Better or worse, she smiled, knowing the answer. Better. So much better. He pulled her close, careful of her condition. I thought I was saving you that day. Turns out you saved me. We saved each other. She said it with finality. That's what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from our limitations, from our fear of being more than we thought possible. Outside, the desert night settled over land that had seen too much violence but was learning peace. Inside, people from different worlds celebrated together, finding common ground in joy and hope, and the promise of new life. And Marcus Brennan, failed farmer turned bridge builder, stood at the center of it all and understood that he'd finally found what his father had died searching for, a reason to keep fighting that went beyond mere survival. A future worth building, a legacy worth leaving. Some debts he knew now couldn't be repaid. They could only be honored through how you lived, how you treated people, what you chose when choices mattered. He'd honor his debt to Kiona and Neshoba by continuing the work they'd started, by raising his daughter to see people as human beings first, and representatives of groups second, by choosing cooperation whenever possible and fighting only when necessary. The ranch would thrive or fail based on weather and luck and effort. The treaty would hold or break based on how many people chose to honor it. But the connections they'd built, the trust they'd established, the hope they'd maintained, those would endure as long as people were willing to fight for them. And Marcus would fight, not with guns and violence, though he'd do that if forced, but with daily choices to build instead of destroy, to connect instead of separate, to hope instead of despair. That was the real victory he understood now, not defeating enemies or accumulating wealth or achieving fame, but choosing every day to be better than fear and hatred and despair demanded. Choosing to believe that tomorrow could be better if enough people worked to make it so. As the celebration continued around him, as his daughter slept peacefully, surrounded by people who would protect her, as his wife recovered with her father and brother nearby, Marcus allowed himself a moment of pure gratitude for the path that had led him here. He'd found a dying woman and made a choice. Everything else had followed. The debt had been paid in gold, but the real value was measured in transformation of himself, of his relationships, of his understanding of what mattered. The innocent should not hang. Justice mattered more than law when law protected the guilty. Honor required action, not just belief. And love, real lasting love, was built not in moments of passion, but in choices made when things were difficult, when walking away would be easier, when commitment cost something precious. These were the truths Marcus carried, now hard-won through conflict and compromise, paid for in blood and tears and determination. They'd guide him through whatever challenges came next, whatever storms the future held. Because storms would come. Peace was never permanent, never guaranteed. It had to be fought for every day, maintained through constant effort, protected from those who profited from chaos. But standing here in this moment, surrounded by proof that bridge building was possible, Marcus believed the fight was worth it. His father had taught him stubbornness and pride. Kiona had taught him flexibility and humility. Together, those lessons had forged him into someone capable of the work ahead. The work of maintaining peace in a territory that defaulted to violence, of raising a child to see possibility where others saw only division, of honoring commitments when breaking them would be easier, of choosing hope when despair seemed justified. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But Marcus had learned that the hardest paths often led to the best destinations, and he was finally walking a path that felt right. As the party wound down and people began departing, as his daughter woke hungry and demanding, as his wife nursed their child, while her father watched with pride, Marcus understood that this was what success actually looked like. Not a perfect ranch or unlimited wealth or complete peace, but a life filled with meaning, connections that mattered, hope that tomorrow might be better, and the determination to make that hope reality through daily choices to be better than circumstances demanded. His father's dream had been the ranch. Marcus's dream had become something larger, a future where his daughter could grow up in a territory defined by cooperation rather than conflict, where people were judged by character rather than origin, where peace was possible because enough people chose to build it. That dream might fail, probably would fail multiple times, requiring constant rebuilding. But Marcus had learned that failure wasn't falling down. Failure was refusing to get back up, refusing to try again, refusing to believe that effort mattered. He would get back up, would try again, would believe that his choices, however small, contributed to something larger than himself. That was the real lesson of the past year. Not that individual actions could change the world, but that the world changed through accumulated individual actions, through enough people choosing right over easy, connection over isolation, Hope over despair. Marcus had made that choice in a moment of crisis. Now he'd spend the rest of his life honoring that choice through how he lived, what he taught his daughter, how he treated people who came to his door needing help. The debt had been paid in gold, but the real payment, the lasting payment, was measured in transformed lives and maintained hope, and bridges built between people who'd been taught to see each other as enemies. As night settled fully over his ranch, over the territory, over land that had seen too much violence but was learning peace, Marcus held his daughter and made her a promise. I'll teach you that honor matters more than success, that people deserve respect regardless of origin, that peace is built through daily choices to cooperate instead of conflict, that love requires courage, that hope requires determination, that the future belongs to those willing to build it one small choice at a time. His daughter couldn't understand the words yet, but she would eventually, and Marcus would make sure she grew up in a world slightly better than the one he'd inherited because enough people had chosen to make it so. That was the real victory, the only victory that mattered. And standing there in his rebuilt barn on his thriving ranch, surrounded by proof that impossible things became possible when people chose to make them real, Marcus Brennan finally understood what his father had died searching for. Not wealth or success or perfect crops, but purpose, connection, legacy that mattered beyond yourself. He'd found it in the most unlikely way through a choice made in crisis that had transformed everything. And he'd honor that gift by living the rest of his life worthy of it. Some debts could never be repaid. They could only be honored through becoming the person who deserved the gift. Marcus would spend the rest of his life trying to become that person, knowing he'd often fall short, but believing the attempt itself had value. The innocent should not hang. Justice mattered. Honor required action. Love demanded courage. Peace needed builders. Hope needed believers. These were the truths Marcus carried now. Hard won, paid for in full, worth defending for the rest of his life. As his daughter slept and his wife smiled and his future stretched before him, full of challenge and possibility, Marcus understood that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Home. Not just a place, but a feeling. Belonging not just to land, but to people, to purpose, to something larger than himself. His father's ranch had become a bridge between worlds. And Marcus Brennan, farmer and warrior and father and friend, would spend the rest of his life making sure that bridge remained standing strong enough to carry the weight of all who needed to cross. That was his debt, his honor, his choice, and it was enough.